Sometimes the most powerful people in the world forget that everyone has a story worth respecting. They forget that the person serving their coffee might have a PhD, that the janitor cleaning their office might speak 5 languages, or that the waitress taking their order might be married to someone who could destroy their empire with a single phone call. This is the story of Marcus Blackwell, a tech billionaire worth $47 billion, who learned this lesson in the most humbling way possible when he mistook a federal agent's wife for someone he could intimidate and abuse. What he didn't know was that Special Agent David Chen had been tracking his illegal activities for months, and his wife Sarah had just become the key witness that would bring down one of the most powerful men in America. Some mistakes cost money. Others cost freedom. And some reveal the true character of those who think they're untouchable. The elevator climbed toward the 50th floor of the Blackwell Tower, its golden walls reflecting Sarah Chen's nervous face back at her. She adjusted her black uniform and checked her earpiece one more time. Working private events for the ultra-wealthy wasn't her usual job, but the catering company had offered triple pay for tonight's exclusive dinner party, and she and David were saving for their dream house. She had no idea that her husband, FBI Special Agent David Chen, was 3 blocks away in an unmarked van, monitoring communications as part of a federal investigation into the very man hosting tonight's gathering. Marcus Blackwell stood in his penthouse office, adjusting his platinum cufflinks as he gazed out at the city he felt he owned. At 52, he had built an empire from a small tech startup, accumulating wealth that most people couldn't even comprehend. His company, Blackwell Industries, dominated the data mining and social media analytics market, but his real fortune came from activities the government was only beginning to understand. Tonight's dinner was crucial. 7 of the world's most powerful technology leaders would gather to discuss their next phase of expansion into international markets, using methods that skirted the edges of legality. Sarah emerged from the service elevator into a world of marble floors and crystal chandeliers. The penthouse sprawled across the entire floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the city skyline. Other servers moved efficiently through the space, setting up for the evening's event. She had worked high-end parties before, but nothing quite like this. The art on the walls alone was worth millions, and every piece of furniture looked like it belonged in a museum. The head server, Maria Rodriguez, briefed the team quickly. "Mr. Blackwell expects perfection tonight. These guests are extremely important to his business. Stay invisible, move quietly, and do not speak unless spoken to directly. The dinner starts at 8, cocktails are being served now in the main salon." Sarah nodded, understanding the gravity of the evening. She had served wealthy clients before and knew the drill. David Chen adjusted his headphones in the surveillance van parked in an alley behind the Blackwell Tower. His team had been investigating Marcus Blackwell for 8 months, following a trail of suspicious financial transactions that suggested money laundering, tax evasion, and possibly worse. Tonight's gathering was expected to include several individuals on federal watch lists, and David's team hoped to capture conversations that could provide the breakthrough they needed in their case. "Audio check on all frequencies," David spoke into his microphone. His partner, Agent Lisa Morrison, monitored the computer screens showing various surveillance feeds. They had managed to plant listening devices in several areas of the penthouse during a previous catering event, but Blackwell's security team swept for bugs regularly, so they couldn't be sure what was still operational. Sarah moved through the cocktail hour seamlessly, offering champagne and canapés to guests who barely acknowledged her presence. She recognized several faces from business magazines and news programs, tech moguls, venture capitalists, and international investors whose names appeared regularly in financial headlines. The conversations she overheard were casual but loaded with references to offshore accounts, international partnerships, and regulatory challenges they were working to overcome. Marcus Blackwell worked the room like a master politician, moving from group to group, sharing jokes and making connections. He had a particular talent for making each person feel like the most important individual in the room, a skill that had helped him build his empire. However, those who knew him well understood that beneath his charming exterior lay a ruthless businessman who would eliminate any threat to his success without hesitation. As the evening progressed, Sarah noticed increasing tension among some of the guests. Conversations became more hushed, and several men kept checking their phones with worried expressions. She overheard fragments of discussions about federal investigations, regulatory pressure, and the need to accelerate certain timelines. Her training as the wife of an FBI agent had taught her to notice such details, though she had no idea how relevant they might be. David's team struggled with audio quality throughout the evening. Most of their planted devices had indeed been discovered and removed, leaving them with only partial coverage of the penthouse. They could hear fragments of conversations, but nothing clear enough to use as evidence. The investigation that had consumed months of work seemed to be yielding minimal results, and David felt the frustration building among his team members. The dinner itself was a masterpiece of culinary art, prepared by one of the city's most exclusive chefs. Sarah and her colleagues served 7 courses while the guests discussed business with increasing urgency. The topics ranged from cryptocurrency investments to artificial intelligence development, but always with an undercurrent of concern about government oversight and the need to protect their interests. Marcus Blackwell observed everything with calculating eyes. He had built his fortune by staying 3 steps ahead of his competitors and 2 steps ahead of regulators. Tonight's gathering was partly social, but primarily strategic. These men controlled enough wealth and influence to shape markets and governments, and their alliance was crucial for the next phase of his plans. As the evening wore on, Sarah began to notice that Mr. Blackwell's attention seemed to focus on her more frequently than the other servers. Initially, she attributed this to her newness. Perhaps he was simply ensuring that the unfamiliar staff member was performing adequately. However, his stares became more prolonged and uncomfortable, and she began to feel increasingly uneasy about his attention. The guests discussed plans that sounded increasingly questionable to Sarah's trained ear. References to moving operations offshore, restructuring corporate entities to avoid oversight, and timing major transactions to coincide with regulatory gaps suggested activities that existed in legal gray areas at best. She continued serving professionally while mentally cataloging details that might interest David's work, though she still had no idea of the connection. David checked his watch repeatedly as the evening progressed. His team's surveillance operation was yielding disappointing results, and he knew they might not get another opportunity like this for months. The investigation into Blackwell Industries had consumed enormous resources, and pressure was mounting from his superiors to either produce actionable intelligence or redirect their efforts elsewhere. As the dinner concluded and guests began to depart, Marcus Blackwell's demeanor shifted noticeably. The charming host facade gave way to something harder and more calculating. He moved through the penthouse checking details, ensuring that sensitive materials were secured, and speaking in low tones with his security chief about the evening's events. Sarah helped clear the dinner service efficiently, eager to finish her shift and return home to David. The evening had been professionally successful but personally draining due to the uncomfortable attention from their host. She looked forward to sharing her observations with David, not knowing that her experiences tonight would soon become central to a federal investigation that would reshape both their lives forever. The last guests departed around midnight, leaving behind an atmosphere thick with unspoken tensions and unfinished business. Marcus Blackwell stood alone in his penthouse, reviewing the evening's conversations and considering his next moves. He had built his empire by recognizing opportunities and eliminating threats, and tonight had revealed both possibilities and dangers that would require careful handling. As the catering staff began their final cleanup duties, Sarah found herself increasingly anxious to leave. The evening had gone well professionally, but something about Marcus Blackwell's attention made her skin crawl. She focused on completing her tasks efficiently while staying as far from their host as possible, unaware that the most dangerous part of her evening was about to begin. David's surveillance team began packing their equipment with mixed feelings. They had gathered some interesting intelligence, but nothing that could justify the massive resources invested in the operation. The investigation into Marcus Blackwell would continue, but tonight's missed opportunity would force them to reconsider their strategies and look for new approaches to gathering the evidence they needed. The stage was set for a confrontation that would expose the true character of a man who believed his wealth made him untouchable, witnessed by someone whose husband possessed the power to destroy everything Blackwell had built. Sometimes justice arrives in the most unexpected ways, delivered by those who appear powerless but carry connections that can reshape the world. Sarah Chan moved efficiently through the penthouse, collecting empty glasses and plates while the other catering staff cleaned the kitchen and dining areas. Most of the team had already finished their duties and left, but Sarah always prided herself on thorough work, ensuring every detail was perfect before departing. She had no way of knowing that Marcus Blackwell had deliberately arranged for her to be among the last staff members remaining, or that his evening's entertainment was far from over. 3 blocks away, David Chen rubbed his tired eyes as he reviewed the audio recordings his team had captured throughout the evening. The quality was frustratingly poor, filled with static and gaps where their surveillance devices had failed. His partner Lisa Morrison worked beside him, trying to enhance the clearest segments using specialized software, but their 8-month investigation seemed to be hitting another dead end. "We've got fragments of conversation about offshore banking," Lisa reported, adjusting her headphones. "But nothing concrete enough to build a case on. Blackwell's security team did a thorough sweep, they found and disabled most of our equipment." David nodded grimly, knowing they would need to explain their limited results to supervisors who had invested significant resources in this operation. Marcus Blackwell dismissed his security team for the evening, assuring them that the remaining catering staff could handle the final cleanup without supervision. This was unusual, as he typically maintained tight security protocols, but his security chief was too well paid to question the boss's decisions. The penthouse grew quieter as fewer people remained, creating an atmosphere that made Sarah increasingly uncomfortable. She had learned to trust her instincts during her years married to an FBI agent, and every instinct was telling her to finish quickly and leave. However, her professional pride demanded that she complete her assigned tasks thoroughly. She moved toward the guest restroom area to ensure towels were properly arranged and supplies replenished, unaware that Blackwell was watching her every movement from the shadows of the hallway. David's frustration mounted as he listened to static-filled recordings that provided tantalizing hints of criminal activity without delivering actionable evidence. References to the Mumbai operation, restructuring the Cayman holdings, and accelerating the timeline before the Senate hearing suggested significant illegal activity, but the audio quality made them legally worthless. "We need to consider other approaches," David told his team. "Traditional surveillance isn't working against someone with Blackwell's resources. He's too careful, too well protected." Agent Morrison nodded agreement, but they both knew that alternative approaches would require months of additional planning and approval from higher authorities who were already questioning their progress. Sarah entered the guest restroom area, a luxurious space with marble surfaces and gold fixtures that probably cost more than most people's annual salaries. She quickly checked supplies and straightened towels, eager to complete this final task and head home. The evening had been successful from a catering perspective, but the uncomfortable attention from their host made her anxious to leave. Marcus Blackwell approached silently, his expensive shoes making no sound on the marble floors. He had spent the evening observing Sarah's professional demeanor and quiet efficiency, but, more importantly, he had noticed something that others missed. She listened carefully to conversations and seemed to understand more than a typical server might. His paranoid nature, honed by years of operating in legal gray areas, suggested she might be more than she appeared. The penthouse had grown almost silent except for the distant sounds of the remaining catering staff cleaning the kitchen. Sarah finished her tasks in the restroom area and prepared to rejoin her colleagues, but found Marcus Blackwell standing in the doorway, blocking her exit. His charming smile from earlier had been replaced by something much more calculating and threatening. "Excuse me, Mr. Blackwell," Sarah said politely, trying to maintain professional composure despite her growing alarm. "I need to rejoin my team to finish our duties." She attempted to step past him, but he moved to block her path more deliberately, his intentions becoming unmistakably clear. David adjusted his surveillance equipment one final time, hoping to capture any conversations as guests departed the building. His team monitored the lobby and parking areas, watching expensive cars and private helicopters transport some of the world's wealthiest individuals back to their respective domains. The investigation felt like a failure, but David had learned that persistence often paid off in unexpected ways. "I don't think you're who you pretend to be," Marcus Blackwell said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of accumulated power and the assumption that he could intimidate anyone into submission. "Professional servers don't usually listen to business conversations with such interest, and they certainly don't take mental notes the way you've been doing all evening." Sarah's heart rate increased as she recognized the danger of her situation. Her husband had trained her in basic self-defense and situational awareness, but she had never expected to need those skills while working a catering job. She maintained eye contact while calculating her options, knowing that showing fear would only encourage whatever Blackwell was planning. "I'm just doing my job, sir," Sarah responded firmly, hoping her voice conveyed more confidence than she felt. The catering company emphasizes discretion and professionalism. "I need to return to my colleagues now." She attempted once more to move past him, but his hand grabbed her arm with surprising strength for a man who spent most of his time behind desks and in boardrooms. David's communication equipment suddenly crackled with interference that seemed different from their usual technical difficulties. The patterns suggested electronic jamming rather than equipment failure, which would indicate that someone was actively trying to block their surveillance capabilities. This development alarmed him more than their poor audio quality had, as it suggested that their operation might have been discovered. "Lisa, are you seeing this interference pattern?" David asked his partner, pointing to the unusual readings on their monitoring equipment. "This looks like active countermeasures, not passive security measures." Lisa Morrison frowned as she analyzed the data, confirming David's suspicions that someone was working to defeat their surveillance operation in real time. Marcus Blackwell's grip tightened on Sarah's arm as he leaned closer, his breath carrying the expensive whiskey he had consumed throughout the evening. "I think we need to have a private conversation about what you've heard tonight and who you really work for. Your story about being a simple catering server doesn't quite add up, and I didn't build my fortune by ignoring suspicious details." Sarah realized that her careful attention to the evening's conversations had been noticed and misinterpreted as something far more sinister than a federal agent's wife's natural curiosity. She found herself trapped in a situation where her innocence might not matter if Marcus Blackwell had decided she posed a threat to his operations. The remaining catering staff worked efficiently in the kitchen, unaware that their colleague was being cornered by their host in a distant part of the penthouse. The building's excellent soundproofing meant that any calls for help would likely go unheard, and Sarah understood that she would need to rely on her own resources to escape whatever Marcus Blackwell was planning. David's team detected increasing levels of electronic jamming that suggested sophisticated countermeasures were being deployed throughout the Blackwell Tower. This development indicated either exceptional paranoia or genuine awareness that federal surveillance was in progress. Either possibility meant their investigation had reached a critical juncture that could go very badly. "We might have been compromised," David told his team, studying the interference patterns that were systematically blocking their surveillance frequencies. "Someone knows we're here, and they're actively working to defeat our equipment." The implications were serious. If Blackwell was aware of federal surveillance, he might be taking steps to eliminate evidence or silence potential witnesses. Sarah tried a different approach, appealing to Marcus Blackwell's business sense rather than challenging him directly. "Mr. Blackwell, I understand your concerns, but I assure you I'm simply a catering server trying to do my job well. The company stressed the importance of this event, so I've been extra attentive to ensure everything goes smoothly. I need to rejoin my team before they wonder where I am." Marcus Blackwell studied her face carefully, looking for signs of deception or fear that might confirm his suspicions. His wealth and power had taught him that most people would crumble under pressure, revealing their true intentions when properly motivated. He had no intention of allowing a potential threat to his empire to walk away without providing answers to his satisfaction. "Your team can wait," he said with the casual authority of someone accustomed to complete control over his environment. "We're going to have our conversation right here, right now. I want to know who sent you, what you've heard, and what you plan to do with that information. Your answers will determine how the rest of your evening proceeds." The threat in his voice was unmistakable, and Sarah realized that her situation had escalated far beyond a simple misunderstanding. She was trapped alone with a man who commanded vast resources and clearly had no qualms about using intimidation and, worse, to protect his interests. Her husband's training had prepared her for many scenarios, but being cornered by a billionaire who suspected her of being a federal agent was not among them. David's surveillance equipment registered a complete blackout of all frequencies around the Blackwell Tower, indicating that whoever was jamming their signals had just escalated their countermeasures dramatically. This development suggested that something significant was happening inside the building, and David felt a growing sense of urgency that their investigation had reached a dangerous tipping point that could have far-reaching consequences for everyone involved. Marcus Blackwell stepped closer to Sarah, using his physical presence to intimidate her in the confined space of the guest restroom area. His expensive cologne mixed with the smell of whiskey created an oppressive atmosphere as he blocked her only exit route. Sarah had faced difficult situations before, but never while trapped alone with someone who commanded the kind of power that could make people disappear without consequences. "Let me explain how this works," Blackwell said in a voice that carried the weight of absolute authority. "I didn't build a $47 billion empire by being careless about security. I notice things that others miss, and tonight I noticed you paying attention to conversations that should have been meaningless to a simple catering server." His eyes narrowed as he studied her reaction, looking for confirmation of his suspicions. David Chen stared at his surveillance monitors with growing alarm as the electronic interference around Blackwell Tower intensified. The systematic jamming of all their frequencies suggested sophisticated countermeasures that went far beyond normal corporate security protocols. Someone inside that building knew exactly what they were doing, and they were working to ensure that no outside communication could penetrate their operations. "This isn't random interference," David told Agent Morrison, pointing to the patterns on their screens. "Someone is actively targeting our specific frequencies. They know we're here, they know what equipment we're using, and they're systematically defeating our surveillance capabilities." The implications were troubling. If Blackwell was aware of federal surveillance, the entire investigation could be compromised. Sarah forced herself to remain calm despite her racing heart, drawing on the mental training her husband had provided over years of marriage to an FBI agent. She understood that showing fear would only escalate the situation, while maintaining composure might create opportunities to diffuse the tension and escape safely. "Mr. Blackwell, I think there's been a misunderstanding," she said with carefully controlled voice. "I'm simply thorough in my work because this job is important to me. The catering company told us that your guests were extremely important, so I've been extra careful to ensure everything meets your standards. I have no hidden agenda or ulterior motives." Marcus Blackwell laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Years of operating in the gray areas between legal and illegal had made him expert at reading people, and something about Sarah's demeanor suggested she was more sophisticated than she appeared. Her composure under pressure, her careful word choices, and her obvious intelligence all raised red flags for someone whose survival depended on identifying threats before they could materialize. "Your story might be convincing to someone else," he replied, moving even closer until Sarah could feel his breath on her face. "But I've spent decades learning to spot federal agents, corporate spies, and investigative journalists. You have the training, the awareness, and the listening skills that separate professionals from ordinary people. So I'll ask you one more time, who do you really work for?" 3 blocks away, David's team worked frantically to re-establish communication with their surveillance equipment. The electronic jamming had escalated to levels that suggested military-grade countermeasures, far beyond anything a civilian corporation should possess. This development indicated that Marcus Blackwell had access to technology and expertise that raised serious questions about his international connections and possible government relationships. "We need to consider the possibility that our operation has been blown from the beginning," Agent Morrison said grimly, studying the sophisticated interference patterns. "This level of countermeasure capability suggests they've been tracking our investigation and preparing responses. We might be walking into a trap rather than conducting surveillance." Sarah realized that her situation was deteriorating rapidly and that Marcus Blackwell had already decided she was a threat to his operations. His paranoid nature, combined with his vast resources and apparent willingness to use intimidation, created a dangerous combination that could escalate beyond words very quickly. She needed to find a way to de-escalate the situation without confirming his suspicions or putting herself in greater danger. "I understand your concern for security," Sarah said carefully, "but I assure you that I'm exactly who I appear to be. I'm a part-time catering server trying to earn extra money for my family. If my attention to detail has made you uncomfortable, I apologize, but it comes from wanting to do excellent work, not from any hidden agenda." Marcus Blackwell studied her face intently, looking for micro-expressions that might reveal deception or fear. His business success had required him to become expert at reading people's true intentions, and he prided himself on his ability to see through lies and manipulation. However, Sarah's calm demeanor and consistent story were beginning to create doubt about his initial assessment. David's communication equipment suddenly registered a brief break in the jamming, allowing partial audio to come through from their remaining surveillance devices inside Blackwell Tower. The fragments were barely audible, but they seemed to include voices from areas that should have been empty by now. This development suggested that activities were continuing inside the building after the official dinner party had concluded. "Are you getting this audio?" David asked Agent Morrison, adjusting his headphones to better capture the weak signals. "Someone's still active up there, and it sounds like there might be a confrontation in progress." The implications were troubling. If something was happening to remaining staff members, their investigation might have inadvertently put innocent people in danger. Sarah decided to try a different approach, appealing to Marcus Blackwell's business instincts rather than continuing to protest her innocence. "Mr. Blackwell, even if I were what you suspect, which I'm not, what would you gain by confronting me here? If I were connected to law enforcement, my colleagues would already know where I am and what I'm doing. Threatening me would only make your situation worse, not better." This logical argument seemed to give Blackwell pause, as it highlighted the potential consequences of his actions rather than simply denying his accusations. His paranoid nature was balanced by sharp business intelligence that had built his empire, and Sarah's point about the risks of threatening a potential federal agent carried weight with someone who understood the importance of calculating risk versus reward. However, Blackwell's next words revealed the true depth of his paranoia and the extent to which he was willing to go to protect his interests. "That's exactly why we're having this conversation in a location that's been specially prepared for such discussions. This room is completely soundproof and electronically shielded. Your colleagues, whether they're caterers or federal agents, have no way of knowing what's happening here." Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized the implications of his statement. The guest restroom wasn't simply luxurious, it had been deliberately designed to isolate and contain people for interrogation or worse. Marcus Blackwell had anticipated situations like this and prepared accordingly, suggesting that her predicament might not be his first experience with suspected surveillance threats. David's team detected unusual electrical activity within Blackwell Tower that suggested the use of specialized equipment designed to block electronic surveillance and communication. The patterns were consistent with facilities designed for interrogation or information extraction, technologies that no legitimate civilian business should possess. This discovery indicated that their investigation had uncovered something far more serious than financial crimes. "We're not dealing with simple corporate fraud," David told his team, studying the electronic signatures they were detecting. "Blackwell has capabilities that suggest connections to intelligence services or military contractors. This operation has just become exponentially more dangerous than we anticipated." Agent Morrison worked to enhance their audio reception, managing to capture fragments of conversation that included what sounded like intimidation and interrogation. The voices were too distorted to identify clearly, but the tone and content suggested that someone inside the building was being subjected to aggressive questioning about their identity and intentions. Sarah realized that her husband's worst fears about his dangerous profession had somehow reached into her own life through a simple catering job. She was trapped with a man who possessed the resources and apparent willingness to eliminate perceived threats to his empire, and her options for escape were rapidly diminishing as the situation escalated beyond her ability to control. Marcus Blackwell reached into his jacket and withdrew what appeared to be a small electronic device, which he activated with a subtle gesture. Sarah couldn't identify the device's purpose, but Blackwell's satisfied expression suggested it was enhancing their isolation or perhaps recording their conversation for later analysis. "Now that we have complete privacy," Blackwell said with renewed confidence, "we can have the honest conversation that this situation requires. I'm going to ask you some very specific questions about your background, your employment history, and your connections to law enforcement. Your answers will determine how this evening concludes for both of us." David's surveillance equipment registered a complete blackout of all signals from the Blackwell Tower area, as if the entire building had suddenly disappeared from the electromagnetic spectrum. This level of signal isolation suggested technology that went far beyond civilian security measures and into the realm of government or military applications that raised serious questions about Blackwell's true nature and connections. The investigation that had begun as a routine financial fraud case had suddenly escalated into something that threatened not only the federal agents involved but potentially innocent civilians who had become inadvertently caught in a web of criminal activity that reached far higher and deeper than anyone had imagined. Sarah Chin was about to become the key witness in a case that would reshape everything they thought they knew about Marcus Blackwell and his empire. Sarah Chin took a deep breath and made a decision that would change everything. Her years of marriage to an FBI agent had taught her that sometimes the truth, even when dangerous, offered the best path forward. She reached slowly into her uniform pocket, causing Marcus Blackwell to tense with suspicion, but, instead of a weapon, she withdrew a small device that made his eyes widen with recognition and growing alarm. "Mr. Blackwell," Sarah said calmly, holding up the miniature recording device, "I need to inform you that this entire conversation has been transmitted to my husband, FBI Special Agent David Chen, who has been conducting surveillance on your activities for the past 8 months. Everything you've said and done tonight has been recorded as evidence in a federal investigation." The color drained from Marcus Blackwell's face as the implications of her revelation crashed over him like a tidal wave. The woman he had cornered and threatened wasn't a potential spy or corporate investigator. She was married to the federal agent who had been hunting him, and he had just provided a confession of his suspicious activities while threatening a federal agent's spouse. His carefully constructed empire suddenly felt as fragile as a house of cards in a hurricane. David Chen's head snapped up from his surveillance equipment as Sarah's voice came through clearly on the emergency frequency she had just activated. The high-quality audio transmission revealed not only her location but also provided crystal-clear evidence of Blackwell's threats and admissions. After months of frustrating surveillance attempts, his wife had just delivered the breakthrough their investigation desperately needed. "All units, this is Agent Chen," David spoke rapidly into his radio. "We have an active situation at Blackwell Tower. My wife is inside the building and has just revealed herself to the target. We need immediate backup and extraction teams. This is no longer a surveillance operation, it's a rescue mission." His hands shook slightly as he realized that their investigation had put Sarah in mortal danger. Marcus Blackwell's shock quickly transformed into calculating fury as he processed the full scope of his predicament. He had built his fortune by staying ahead of investigations and eliminating threats before they could materialize, but somehow he had walked directly into a trap set by the very people he had been evading. His paranoid nature, which had protected him for years, had finally led him to make the mistake that would destroy everything. "You have no idea what you've done," Blackwell snarled, his charming facade completely abandoned. "Do you think a simple recording device gives you power over me? I have resources and connections that extend far beyond what your husband's little FBI investigation can touch. This conversation is far from over." Sarah maintained her composure despite the escalating danger, knowing that her transmission was providing David and his team with real-time intelligence about her situation. She had activated a backup communication system that David had insisted she carry during his more dangerous investigations, though neither had expected she would need it during a catering job. "Actually, Mr. Blackwell, this conversation has been over since the moment you decided to threaten me," Sarah replied steadily. "Federal agents are already surrounding this building, and everything you've said tonight has been recorded and transmitted to FBI headquarters. Your empire just collapsed, and your only choice now is whether to surrender peacefully or make your situation significantly worse." David coordinated rapidly with his team and backup units that were racing toward Blackwell Tower from multiple directions. The revelation that Sarah was inside the building and in immediate danger had transformed their methodical investigation into an emergency rescue operation that required split-second decision-making and flawless execution. "Building security shows multiple exit points, but Blackwell has his own security team and possible escape routes," Agent Morrison reported while reviewing building blueprints. "We need to secure the building perimeter before he realizes the full scope of his exposure and attempts to flee or destroy evidence." Marcus Blackwell's mind raced through his options with the calculating speed that had built his empire. He possessed resources that most criminals could never imagine: private security forces, escape routes, offshore accounts, and connections in governments around the world. However, none of those advantages could help him with the immediate problem of a federal agent's wife who had just recorded his confession and transmitted it to FBI headquarters. Sarah watched Blackwell's expression shift from shock to anger to cold calculation, recognizing the dangerous transition that her husband had warned her about in violent suspects. The moment when criminals stop thinking about consequences and focused only on immediate survival was when situations became most dangerous for everyone involved. Your husband's investigation was clever, Blackwell admitted with grudging respect, but he made one crucial mistake. He assumed that I would be content to simply run when cornered. Instead, I've spent years preparing for this possibility, and I have options that extend far beyond escaping federal prosecution. The threat in his voice was unmistakable, and Sarah realized that Blackwell's resources might include capabilities that could threaten not only her immediate safety but also her husband's investigation and the safety of other federal agents. His calm confidence suggested he possessed backup plans that could still allow him to escape justice despite the evidence she had gathered. David's team positioned themselves around Blackwell Tower while maintaining communication with Sarah through her concealed transmitter. The building's sophisticated security systems complicated their approach, but David's knowledge of Sarah's location and condition allowed them to plan their entry with precision and speed that would have been impossible during a blind assault. Target is contained on the 50th floor in the guest restroom area, David reported to the tactical team. Suspect is aware of our investigation and has made direct threats against a federal agent's spouse. We need to assume he's armed and extremely dangerous. This man has resources that could include private military contractors and international escape routes. Sarah heard the distant sound of helicopters approaching the building, followed by what sounded like multiple vehicles arriving in the street below. Blackwell heard the sounds too, and his expression shifted to something even more dangerous as he realized that his situation was deteriorating beyond his ability to control through intimidation or negotiation. It seems your husband works more quickly than I anticipated, Blackwell said with a cold smile that contained no humor. However, you both underestimate the extent of my preparations for this possibility. This building contains more than just my corporate offices, it houses capabilities that your federal investigation never discovered. The revelation that Blackwell Tower contained hidden capabilities beyond their intelligence sent a chill through Sarah as she realized their situation might be even more complex and dangerous than anyone had anticipated. Her husband's investigation had uncovered financial crimes, but Blackwell's confidence suggested activities that reached into areas that could threaten national security. David received reports from tactical teams that were encountering unexpected resistance as they attempted to enter Blackwell Tower. The building's security systems were far more sophisticated than anticipated, suggesting military-grade technology that raised serious questions about Blackwell's true activities and connections. We're encountering countermeasures that exceed civilian security capabilities, the tactical team leader reported. This building is designed to resist federal law enforcement entry. We need specialized equipment and additional personnel to overcome these defenses safely. Marcus Blackwell activated another device concealed in his jacket, and Sarah heard subtle changes in the building's ambient sounds that suggested major systems were being activated throughout the structure. His preparations for this confrontation clearly extend.